All right, folks. Hello. We'll give another minute or so in case people want to jump onto this thing. By the way, she's a real person. You believe it or not? Contrary to popular belief. Tell you what, while we're waiting, because people probably know me a little bit more just because I saw the first one, tell everybody about yourself. I'm going to pull this up to make sure everything is good. But
Yeah,
you
yeah.
want to give an introduction?
I will. My name is Esther Young Shin McIntosh. I'm fancy. I have a four-part name. I met Brian in October, I think.
Yeah,
About 4 months, 4 or 5 months ago.
not too long ago.
Yeah. Coincidence? No, I think not. It felt like a divine connection to me. My father attends Crossroads, and that's the church that Brian attends. And you got connected to my dad to
Yeah.
ask him questions about Korea. This was just right before you were about to go to Korea.
Yeah.
And my dad was connected to you as a resource to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad tapped me and said, help. So I showed up one Sunday
That's right, you
and
showed up.
yes,
That's funny.
I showed up and I introduced myself to you and I
Yep.
basically said, I'm sorry, we cannot be a resource for you because it's been so long since our family went to Korea,
Right.
since I went to Korea.
Yep.
But I said to Brian, I do know someone who can help. I have a friend, former colleague of mine, Rachel Shida. We worked at Amazon together. And she has a similar story of being a Korean adoptee who later on as an adult wanted to go back to Korea and find out more about her story. So I connected Rachel and Brian, and that's sort of how it began.
Yeah, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're what? Long history of 4-month friends here.
Yeah,
Talking
yeah,
about
something
stuff.
like that.
So, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you're feeling better and that your house is healthy again.
Thank you.
That's a lot of stuff to wrangle.
Yeah, it was an infirmary.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad. I'm glad you didn't join us live then for this
Yeah.
one. But
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. Well, folks, thank you for joining us. This is we're calling this the K Talk concert series or something fancy and schmancy to talk through everything. Esther has introduced herself. You know me. I'm Brian Shun, and this is take two.
Take two.
Continuing the conversation about all the things.
Mm-hmm.
So if you like all the things or you know people who like all the things, refer them to this recording. We are on Facebook Live right now. We will repost to YouTube a little bit later once we've finished the live stream. And why don't we go ahead and get it kicked off?
Yeah. Yeah. So talking about Rachel, besides her, I have two people in my life who I'm very, very close to. Two people who are closest to me. I'll keep them anonymous, but sort of found out later in life as adults that their birth mom, or so they thought, was not their birth mom. And
Oh.
they were actually born to different mothers. And both of these are Korean people that I know. The reason I say this is because the concept of adoption is actually something that is very hard for Koreans to talk about. It's a very shameful thing that you sort of keep hidden. And you don't talk about it. You don't openly talk about it. So, with that in mind, when did you sort of first hear about your own adoption? And then it's sort of like your second baptism or something. When is the sort of second time that you sat with the idea of, oh, I'm adopted? What does this mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. My parents were always very open to talk to me. My adoptive parents to talk to me about it. I look nothing like them. I have a Swedish English mother and a Ukrainian Polish dad. Ended up with the last name of Shun because the Shunskis came through Ellis Island and they changed from Shunsky to Shun to sound less Eastern European. So ended up with an Asian sounding last name because my last name is Shun, but yours was
Shin.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But no Asian relation from my adoptive family. It was really kind of weird, but this is how it turned out. Also being one of the only people that had a Korean face in my hometown, right? I mean, it wasn't like a big surprise. Like, wait, you're adopted? I think of the old Steve Martin movie, The Jerk. It's like he's adopted. He's living in a black family. It's like it's always pretty obvious that I was adopted. I think I knew that, but only until recently I treated it very clinically. And that's something that my wife Sabrina would say to me. She goes like, when you tell your story, it's like you're telling it about somebody else. And that's really how I felt. I felt like it was somebody else's story, even though it was mine. And part of it was because it was something that you almost had the expectation when you talk to people when you're little. Like, aren't you glad you were adopted? Aren't you glad? All these things. And the only way you move forward in that conversation sometimes you say, well, yes, I am. Because it's just too much to unpack, and not everybody you should share everything with. But I think like that was the thing, like I didn't want to look at it because I'm like, oh, well, I know how this conversation is going to go. And I just kind of wrote it off. And only really in talking with my children as they got older, and this is kind of some of the driving action why I went on the OKA gathering trip in 2023, was to really like, well, let's just see what this really is, right? And honestly, if I had had too much time to think about it, it probably would have been, well, you know, there's things. And I met you quick. I learned about the trip quick. I learned about all the stuff, and it just happened. And I'm glad it did, because I think it didn't allow me to sit there and contemplate it too much. I just kind of had to go with it.
Yeah.
And that was actually a very positive thing, just to kind of rediscover those things.
Yeah.
You know, that makes sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So you growing up, you were always aware of being adopted, but it sounds like it's only been recently that you really sort of allowed yourself to face what that means.
Correct.
And what you told me about the event that made you sort of decide to apply for the program, and it was also pretty just a few months before you actually went, right?
Yeah. So the timeline really went like in October. I joined a Tennessee adoptee group for Koreans.
Yep.
I had my first dinner with folks, learned about the program, and end of October I applied because there were accepting applications. November I learned about it, and right before, I think it was before Thanksgiving, I met your dad.
That's
and
right.
Mom.
Yep.
Then I met you, and then I went over, and then here we are a couple months later.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty rapid timeline on stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What did you know about your adoption story, about your birth parents prior to going to Korea in December? Did you know anything about that?
I knew that my mom was 26 and unmarried, and I was 2 months premature. And I learned this on this last trip, just how long I was in the incubator for before I went into the orphanage and foster care system over there. So I knew like facts. Now, as I've learned more about what is all involved with Korean adoptions as a group and all the falsification of records and different things, that meant that I was like, well, is this really true? Because I think that people at their core want to know what's true, right? In every area of their life. You don't want to be deceived. In fact, when you find out you've been deceived, you feel that, like, I was deceived. Like, why did you do that? There's a deep betrayal that can happen there.
Yeah.
And so part of what I had to go is like, well, is this really real? You know? And for my particular set of records, it was actually a very small file, like at Eastern Social Welfare Society. So the facts seemed to check out. What I got when I went to go do a case review in Korea was a little bit deeper file review to understand like what they were saying about my parents and then what my parents told me about it and stuff. So it was interesting to kind of see the other side of it. And there were still parts of it that they wouldn't let me like take photographs of and carry off.
Yeah.
They said, okay, that's private information. I'm like, so this is my life and you're telling me I don't have access to some of it? Like, it was all, they let me look at it, but it's in Hangul. Like, I'm like, that's interesting. And like, I don't know what it says necessarily.
Yeah.
On the ones that I could read, though, it was a consistent passing through of information, you know, and there was actually a couple of details that got clarified. For example, I was born in Anyang, so it's like a suburb of Seoul. I was marked as Seoul, but it was on the record. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm sure for Western families, they wouldn't have known what Anyang Gyeonggi-do was. They said, oh, is it Seoul? Oh, it's Seoul. You know, it's like kind of saying you're from Nashville. It's like the greater Nashville area, the greater Seoul area. That was kind of it. You know, there wasn't much any cultural sense that I knew about. It's because it wasn't the environment I grew up in, you know, and it wasn't something that I felt like I could be terribly curious about, because I think my own curiosity about that part of me was never met positively, or often never met positively. So I kind of just learned to kind of compress it down.
Shoved it.
Yeah,
You shoved
down.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is not a healthy thing, but
Yeah.
when you're a child and you just want to move on, and get along with people and things like that, you kind of learn like, this is the way that I can move forward.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me. I mean, I think, like you said, for a lot of us, even if adoption is not a part of our story, we like to shove things. We like to shove feelings. I know I do sometimes. So I can't imagine for you, it's not just a matter of shoving feelings, it's a matter of shoving who you are, your story of origin, where you're from, where you were born, not just Seoul, the specific city,
Yep.
and to whom. These are all things that you for so long had to shove. And it's just truly been a recent journey that you have to face these things.
Yep. With the shove is a great word, and I think I wouldn't have even said shove, but it really is that. And I think the inflection point a few years ago for me was I kind of stopped shoving it down, and now I'm telling anybody who wants me to shove it to shove off. I'm like going like, I ain't gonna do this no more, folks. This is who I am.
Yeah.
And when I said this is who I am, I would say that, and I'm like, yeah, but what does this part of me mean?
Yeah.
There's still like, what I love about it now is that I'm very free to say like, do you speak Korean? I'm like, yeah, about this many words, and I'm at the baby state, the weirdo bitty baby stage.
Yeah.
I'm okay to say that. And because I love being curious, I love learning. And so to give myself permission to be curious about that part of me, it's great. I love it.
You're in a place of being curious about yourself instead of shoving it.
Yeah, and it's not punitive anymore. It's not something where it's like, oh, well, maybe you shouldn't be curious about that. It's like, I can be curious about what I'd like to be curious about. And I don't mean that to sound like just mean and nasty. It's like, but like, there's a lot of times I think in growing up, I gave people that power over me.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't in a position where, if there were a bunch of 7'4" Koreans in the world, like it'd probably be a different power dynamic in parts of the world. It's just not there. But you grow up in the land of Scandinavians and Germans and stuff like that. It's like they're a different height, they're a different structure and stuff like that. And so like I never had like the power advantage in physicality.
Right.
So I had to learn how to have some type of advantage in being clever, being intellectual, being this other type of something or other where I felt like I had a way forward. And so you kind of try to find your adaptation and go with it.
That makes me want to talk about something. I want to hear more about your birth parents, what you found out, and more about, I want to ask you more about your foster mother. But you just said the word adaptation.
Yep.
So when we met to talk, I said, what are some of the things that you've been? Like, what do you all the occupations that you've had, right? So you said, here are some of them. Script analyst, editor's assistant, management and hospitality, e-commerce management, marketing, strategic finance, musician, podcaster, copywriter, just to name a few.
Yeah.
And from that, you brought up a word, adaptivity.
Yes.
Can you tell us about what that word means to you in regards to all these occupations, but what you just said, how you had to learn how to be intellectual?
I think part of the adaptivity started because I always have loved learning and I'm not afraid to ask questions, right? And so I'm not one to just want to sit and push buttons all like, hey, if I can push the same button for 25 years, I mean, some people love doing that. Like that would drive me bananas. I just would like hate life after about 6 months of it. I need the challenge. I need the ability to say, here is a problem or an obstacle or a goal, and then I'll just be hyper aggressive at, getting it done. And I like that because I feel like I've accomplished something, right? Not that that would have been any different, but there were large parts of me that were told to kind of just not be curious about it, just accept it, right? And sometimes the way that you keep yourself in a mental space where you can just navigate, you just say, okay, this is what I just have to accept and go. That's different than understanding like what's true or whatever. It's like, well, just accept this because I said so. And that's a power dynamic difference where it's like, well, how can I then keep this? Because I am curious about stuff. How do I keep going? How do I keep doing that? You know, it made me, it worked on the lateral thinking part of my brain where I can work around problems. And I would venture to say that for a lot of Korean adoptees, they've learned to adapt again and again and again because they are put in an environment that's not familiar, in a culture that's not inherently theirs by birth, right? In family settings that aren't that family dynamic, but you take it on because you've been adopted into this system, right? And because of like all the relationships with like the U.S. and their allies during the Korean War, we all ended up in, you know, European, North American countries, right? Often, like this is where we were. So when you learn to navigate socially, when you learn to navigate professionally, relationally, you have to adapt. And I think sometimes that adaptation as it goes on gets tired and worn out. And it's when I say that, what I mean is you really have to come to terms like how much have you masked?
Yeah.
You know, like the psychological masking. Like, well, this is who I am when I show up, and even though this person treated me differently, I'm supposed to treat them like they're good and acceptable and right and all the things because why? They treat you that way? They definitely don't talk to me that way. So you almost have to learn to put on. And I think as you get older, those things start to crack and fall off. And you either need to reinforce the mask or you just have to let it go. I ain't going to do this anymore. And you really have to do some internal work to say, where have I done this where it's not the right thing? Where is it me acting like something? I've taken on the shape of something that's really not me. You learn to fit yourself into the situation. And I think for just by how I'm wired, that allowed me to find lots of wonderful, like professional adventures throughout my life and all the things that you've talked about, just because I can fit into that environment.
Yeah.
But I always knew that it was a fitting, not a natural, like I say that like I have natural giftings and things like that, but I always felt like I had to adapt to fit something.
Yeah.
But I've taken that into my work life as well. And that allows me to solve a lot of good problems or say, how did you even think of that? It's like, I mean, my brain works like the Lego movie. It's like I pull from here, 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 here. And sometimes there's song and dance and sometimes, you know, specifications and stuff. But that's kind of how it rolls.
I think what you're saying is that adaptation is something that you made work to your advantage. That's how you're wired. That's why you're a curious person. That's why you're someone who likes to learn. That's why you've had the privilege of having many different occupations. But really, it sounds like it stemmed from a place of survival. That's what you had to do to survive, to put on different masks, to be a shapeshifter in order to find belonging in a city in Minnesota where...
City's being kind, but a town of 4,800 people.
Yes.
The bustling metropolis of 4,800 people.
Where there are people who look different from you, white, tall, that adaptation was really your way of surviving and navigating in this world. And in order to find acceptance, belonging, maybe I'm projecting myself.
You're saying everything right, so I'll correct you if you're wrong, but you're saying it right.
Yeah. I know that for myself, it's not necessarily, I don't have an adoption story in my life, but I know that there was always the need to overperform, to be the best, to be the top, to be the smartest, to overcompensate in those areas so that I would feel accepted. I would feel like I belong. I would feel like not only am I accepted, am I belonging, but I'm actually being recognized, acknowledged, applauded, affirmed. I had to overcompensate in certain ways, even being Korean American, let alone a Korean adoptee. Okay, I want to go back to you talking about what you knew about your birth and about your birth parents. So you had some basic information. I'm sure you went to Korea in December hoping to maybe find out more and maybe to even meet your birth mother.
I'll be honest. I didn't have high expectations of that because no information,
Okay.
right? So any information, like I did a 23andMe DNA test. I got the results back of that. There's some second cousins in the mix somewhere. A lot of them are actually stateside. So that's good. So I'll keep taking, swabbing my cheek and sending it off. See what happens. But honestly, beating Jong-sun, my foster mom, that was the closest person I met before age of 1, right? Like that was a really meaningful connection for me. Whether my biological parents ever emerge, I don't know. But I think that it's worth trying,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee that the story is going to be happy.
Yeah.
Right? There's no guarantee they're alive. There's no guarantee of any type of reciprocity in terms of like, did they look for me? Did I look for them?
Yeah.
And I think for that, you open Pandora's box on that and you don't know what to expect, right? And there's a lot of happy stories and a lot of sad stories. So the thing where people ask you, are you excited? I'm expectant. I'm expectant I will find something that I didn't know before. And that to me is okay, because then I have knowledge. I would rather know something and then have to deal with the knowledge of it than not know. And that's just how I'm wired. Some people would be happy to not know and just go on their merry way. But I'm really one that would love to know.
So you're expectant, but it sounds like you almost managed your own expectations before you went to Korea in December.
I did.
That you were open, but it doesn't sound like you are grieving or disappointed about not having found or met your birth mother.
Nope. Because I found a community.
Yeah. Wow.
A bunch of people in the room. And that's really wonderful. And there's a lot of, I think, relational infrastructure that kind of exists right away, right? You're all Korean adoptees. You all grew up in places that weren't Korea. You all had, whatever situations may be. Like there are only so many agencies that you went through. There's only so many, whatever it may be. Well, that's really nice to like not have to explain to everybody every single time. That gets tiring.
Yeah. Less explaining of yourself.
Yeah. It's just like, oh, okay. And like you kind of like get the person enough that you're talking to.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, okay, we're good. And I think that people, especially when you feel a sense of isolation, when you find that community, it's like an oasis in the desert.
So your foster mother, her name is Jong Sun.
I think you're saying it right.
Jong Sun. You really, she's the one who raised you up until the time of adoption to your adoptive mother. And you met her, you spoke with her through a translator, you told me. And are you communicating with her now?
I have a little bit. There's Kakao Talk.
Yep.
Which I haven't sent her a message. I've been learning How Great Thou Art to sing to her, because that's the song that came across her phone when I met her. And so I'm 2 verses in, and I got the refrain. So my early attempts are really bad. You've seen the early attempts of how that thing came out.
I did. A for effort.
Oh, yeah, F, F for effort. Was that what I tried awful hard for that awful translation. But now I've had a few months to get it. And so now I'm actually, when I sing it in the Papago, it's like, okay, I got it right. So a couple little things to brush up, and then I want to send her the video.
Do you have plans to meet her, to see her again?
I would like to. I'd like to be able to bring my family this time to come back and say, hey, here's some folks. And it'd be interesting maybe even to meet some of my foster siblings, because she had 4 biological children.
Right.
So I was like the baby in the bunch. So even just to say hello to them, like I wouldn't have had memory of them other than something visceral.
Yeah.
Like babies can remember things, whether they can express it in words or not. They know.
Absolutely.
This. So that would be interesting to me. Her Jong-sun's husband passed away, I believe, it was a few years ago or so like that. So she's living with one of the daughters. I don't even know where she lives. It's because it was all passed through Eastern, the adoption agency. So I guess she's 80 years old. So, not that you wish, like I got to hurry up and do this thing, but you're in the winter years of your life.
Yeah.
So for an opportunity to have my family even meet her, I think that'd be very special.
What did Jong-sun call you as a baby? What was your name to her?
Chue Gyeongsub.
Gyeongsub.
Yes.
최경섭. Okay.
And that was a name given to me by the foster worker. Right? So the intake worker did not have a chance to meet my birth mother. And that meant that I had her last name.
Oh, the foster
The foster worker.
worker's last name. Wow.
So that's how I got that.
That's why you have 최.
And then when you look at the Hanja version of my name, capital city is what Gyeong means. And then sub is harmony. So I don't know what the family name means.
Wow.
But that's how it came to be. I was born in the capital city. But then the second part of my name means harmony or harmonious. And that's been a consistent feedback from Koreans and from Chinese-speaking people who are like, this is what this symbol means. Because they can look at the original symbol and say that's what it meant. So I have more insight about my name now than ever.
Wow. Okay, I did not know this. 최경섭.
Yep.
And the surname given to you by the foster worker, the foster care worker.
That's it. So honestly, I had a lot of ambivalence toward my Korean name because it was a name assigned to me,
Assigned, right.
you know, but it wasn't given. And I use those terms differently because your mother gives you a name, right? In a case, you are assigned a name.
Right.
So I always had this like, well, it's my name, but what does it really mean?
Right.
And even when I was little, I wanted to change my name to something different. Just because I'm like, well, maybe I become somebody different if I change my name. You know?
You mean you wanted to change your name from Brian to something else?
Yeah, at the time it was J. Michael. I don't know why it was J.
J. Michael.
J. Michael.
Wow.
I mean, as white as you can be.
Yeah.
But I was like, I like the name. I'm like, why couldn't I be that or something like that? That was in elementary school. Now, obviously, children play and they have, they make imaginings. But I really, at that point, wanted to say, how can I remake myself? Even at that age, I could tell like I wanted to be something different than what presented itself in the mirror often.
Wow. That's funny because I did something similar.
Okay.
So, in elementary school, oh, what's your middle name? What's your middle name? And I would tell everyone my middle name is Young.
Yeah.
Young. That's how Young in English, but Young in Korean. And it's a part of my Korean name. And all the kids would go, Young, well, that's weird. Why is that your middle name? Right. And that didn't make me feel good. So I would, on my notepad, write down different versions of what my name could be, my middle name, like Esther Elizabeth Shin, Esther Jessica Shin. But then I also heard that if you have a 4-part name, you're more likely to go to an Ivy League college. I don't know where I heard that. So I would give myself 4-part names, which is why I must have changed my name legally to Esther Young Shin McIntosh, why I needed a 4-part name. Right. And my daughter has a 4-part name. But
you break every form for the government.
Yeah. But we were just talking about calligraphy and something about your name before we started recording this. Yeah. Could you share with us what?
Let me pull this piece of paper out here. It's like we prepared this. All right, folks. Hold it up for the camera. This is my name. Say my name. Say my name. This is the calligraphy Hanja version of my name. Now, you mentioned Crossroads, which is the church I currently attend, and Daniel, he does other things, but he does calligraphy, right? And I'm so unfamiliar with Asian styles of calligraphy. Like, I can tell something's beautiful or something's cool, but I don't have the same level of understanding just because it's not as familiar to me. Now, you have to understand that I'm still learning to say my own Korean name, let alone the Hanja. Like, forget that.
Yeah, yeah.
I showed him a picture of my passport. And I said, this is during Lunar New Year. I said, can you write this? I showed him. He went, oh. And it took him under 30 seconds to take a brush and paint it out. And I'm like, well, that's a pretty complicated character. He just did it. And he handed it back to me. And it was so simple for him to do. Now, later on, I went and I just kind of just sat quietly by myself in a room. And then later, I had, there's different levels of crying. There's I gently weep. There's I'm crying. And then there's I'm really feeling it. And then there's the snot bubble cry.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I went up to Sabrina. I snot bubble cried all over her. Because I told her, I said, this is the first time that somebody knew how to write my name. I've never had my name written for me.
Oh, wow.
You know,
Wow.
I've had people say, "Oh, it probably looked like this," and they've typed it, but they've never written it, and they wouldn't have known the Hanja. But for him, it was so simple. It's like he just did it. And I'm like, I've never had my name written for me. I'm in my 40s. And I didn't realize how much that would impact me until he did it for me.
Wow. I'm needing to take a moment to really let that sink in. Man, in a way, that's how separate you were from your Korean identity, but how connected and reattached you are to who you are and your Korean name. I mean, that anecdote speaks volumes of how you feel about yourself now after your trip, after this recent, I want to call it transformation.
Yeah. The inflection point, especially in the transformation, getting to go on this trip and see it. Because the adult Brian has now the words, he's got the mental wherewithal, and he has the emotional willingness to explore, right? To look foolish about it.
Yeah.
To mispronounce words. To just ask questions honestly. I'm okay to do that.
Yeah.
It wasn't that my parents didn't love me. They did. I was very fortunate to grow up in a household where I knew that both my parents loved me. But nothing of any type of connective tissue to my story other than documents I looked at, and I was always able to look at them. And some pictures maybe, you know. I told in my essay story about going to Korea, my mom didn't know what kimchi was until I told her a few months ago.
Wow, your adoptive mother did not know what kimchi is.
Didn't know.
Wow.
It was just like she didn't know.
Right.
Then in the same breath, when I was showing her some clothes, there's a brand called Core Limited, which is a Korean American brand, and they have some really cool like fashion stuff, right? And so the Korean flag, right? I mean, pretty understood what it is. And I showed there's something that came up with that, and she goes, "I've seen that before. Did you ever own something with that on it?" And I said, "Mom, that's the South Korean flag." She goes, "Oh, that's why I know it, because it came with your adoption stuff." Now she said it. She answered it honestly.
Yes.
But that's a pretty basic thing.
Right.
And so for the level of like no information available,
Wow.
that's what it was.
Wow.
So when you start to explore these things, it just is it's a fun adventure to go on now. To say that I'm okay to ask these questions. And it's fun.
Speaking of your lovely wife, Sabrina, I'm so sorry.
That's right.
I know that it's Sabrina. Can you tell me about your relationship with Sabrina and your children, Isaac and Liliana, and maybe even also your adoptive parents? Has it changed? How is it different from your trip? Post trip.
Yeah.
And this journey that you've been on.
I'll say this. I've realized there are a lot of ways that I would interact with them that was based on my own self-protection mechanisms. You know, I shared in the last broadcast a lot of anger when I was little was really compressed sadness. You know, that shoving.
Yeah.
And there were deep trust things that didn't emerge until you get into a marriage. To a woman who's very trusting.
Yeah.
And very nurturing and very caring.
Yeah.
You know, if you said like, well, who's the mofo of the bunch? Everybody's going to point to me. You know, there's no two ways about it.
At least you're acknowledging.
I am acknowledging. Yeah. And I haven't been always the easiest person to live with in that regard, just because there are, I think, certain things, if you are securely attached to parents and things like that as you grow up.
That's right.
Like you learn to just, of course, this is how you love somebody, and this is the things that you know, and I didn't have that.
Yeah.
Because my parents' marriage was pretty loveless, just to say it. So they loved me, but I didn't see that with them. And so part of this, and she grew up in a large family.
Yeah.
You know,
you told me she has like Sabrina has 8 siblings.
7 out of 8. Yeah.
She's, yeah.
A lot of people walking around.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is all crazy, man. Like, I don't.
Yeah. Opposite. Because you're only child.
Only child.
Yep.
Yep. To parents who adopted me late. So I was in this like weird warp zone of like having no relatives around. And then her family, it's like, I mean, you sneeze and you're going to, it's like in the grocery store and you're going to hit a relative. It's just a lot of people. I think that I'm unpacking a lot of stuff in terms of going back and kind of reprocessing things in life. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you restore a backup on a computer, and it takes a while for the computer to reindex. Well, so I feel like it's not only a mental reprocessing, but it's definitely an emotional reprocessing.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not been the easiest in terms of, I'm in my mood would be in a certain place. And that's been a tough thing for them, especially. But for me, I think what I have more wherewithal about it now. I understand like this is something that I can identify it. Like I don't just go into a mode. And I think that especially having a good counselor and talking through these things and becoming aware of these things within me is like, oh, wait a minute. I just slipped into a mode of operating. What's really driving that? But that's forced me to have to be emotionally candid with myself, because the default stance I took was like, if there's anything that would show any type of vulnerability, there's going to be some armor, right? There's going to be like a certain force field amount of pushing back.
Absolutely.
The problem is that when you are married and you want a healthy marriage, there are inherent vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And that has not always played out well.
Yeah.
It's because it's been my, like, you
Yeah.
know, oh, you saw this ugly part of me. You're trying to find a way to get rid of me.
That's how you felt.
Yeah. But I wouldn't have ever been voiced that.
Wow.
It's like, well, why do you jack this way? It's like, well, yeah, but I wouldn't even acknowledge it.
Yeah.
Yeah, she could see it plain as day. I'm grateful for a good woman who has stuck
Wow.
with me.
That's actually making me emotional while you say that. It's true. I think all of our greatest insecurities and wounds in life come up in marriage.
Yeah. They do.
And if you're not vulnerable, which I will admit, I have a really hard time being vulnerable. That's, I don't know if you know about the Enneagram, but I'm an Enneagram 8.
Okay.
So vulnerability is not for me.
Okay.
Yeah, but it affects the way that we do relationship if we can't be vulnerable.
That's
and
right.
if we can't be honest with ourselves first. So, yeah, I can only imagine that you've done so much processing and being with her, and that she's the spouse who allows you to be in this place and supports you through being in this place, and that your children do as well. And I would imagine that with more honesty with yourself, that there will be more honesty with Sabrina and with your two children. Do you find that that's the case?
Emotional honesty, yes.
Yeah.
We're a very open family in terms of what we talk about and transparency and stuff like that. So that's always been kind of the MO. But for my, I'll call it true emotional opacity.
Yes.
Like the source root of it,
Yes.
right? I'm still not great at it.
Yeah.
It still is something where I'm like, oh, I'm going to have to wait 4 hours till I have time away from it. Oh, that's what that was. But by then it's like whatever his situation happened has happened. So there's a lot of, me learning to say I'm sorry about this and actually understanding why I'm saying sorry, not like sorry because it fixed the situation, but we're like, oh, that's what that did. It sounds like, I'm like Doofus Rufus walking around, but there's really parts of that where it's I didn't understand this so way down deep in the roots of something has come here. And so now what's happened, honestly, with the outworking of reconnecting with Korean roots, like now we've gone way back to attachment and things and understanding that whole dynamic of stuff. And that now is like, okay, that root of it, that's terrible, or that was hurtful, right? And I think the honest part of me, especially the last few years, was understanding how suffering can accompany joy, and you should you don't have to minimize suffering in order to have the joy in your life. In fact, it kind of rips out the authenticity or the relatability of a lot of stories. If this is the happy story and this is the only thing that's been going on, it's like that's not any human experience at all.
So being a parent to two children who are half Korean, living in Tennessee.
Yep.
So, because I was born in California,
Yep.
mostly lived in Washington State, in Seattle area, lived in Los Angeles as an adult. And then I moved here to Tennessee, where I'll just call a spade a spade. There are no Asians.
Well,
Not none. There's
me.
you and me.
Holding
But,
out.
and it's been a really hard challenge for me to not have the community of other Koreans, Korean Americans, other Asian Americans, Asians, people of color, especially because I have a biracial daughter. And do you now see your role as a parent raising biracial children? Do you view it, see it differently in how you want to raise them in their awareness of their identity as being half Korean?
Absolutely. The part of it that I try to, we try to reinforce is that you are this person, right? And these are the components that you make. I think the problem that happens with Korean adoptees is that there's this place where it's like weirdo with a beardo. It always was tagged as that way, right? Rather than say, here's like all the things you are. Let's look at all the special things. There's how you look. This is your personality. These are your giftings. This is all those different things, right? And to have like an integrated identity means that you have all those things and you're not making one thing more important than the other. You're just holding it as, here's the things in my hand that I am.
Yeah.
Right? I think the problem that happens where if people don't have like an external referral point outside themselves to understand their worth and value, right? I believe that human beings have value, immutable value, because it wasn't bestowed upon you by another human being. I believe that's a divine thing. And what that means is that any component of who you are, if you start to say this is the most important thing, right? You've kind of now elevated that to like a godlike status, and that becomes problematic, right? Any way that you want to interpret it. What I'm trying to tell my children is that like you have value, it's immutable, right? Let's fully acknowledge and celebrate and understand all the things you are, right? Because for my part of growing up, it's like, here's all the things you are. The 3 out of 5, that's a good enough thing, and you can just roll with it, right? And that doesn't create an integrated identity. That creates a fractured identity. And so living in, like especially the Southeast, in the United States, there's a very strong understanding of black-white race dynamics.
Yeah.
Because of the history and because of all the things that have happened in the country with slavery and oppression and all the laws that would go along with that.
Yes.
It's been very interesting to be Asian American or just Asian because you're neither.
Right.
But you kind of have this like tennis moderator view of things. And sometimes people allow their biases to come out in front of you.
Yes.
Because you're neither.
Right.
And it's like, no, wait a minute. Yo, do you realize that my wife is white?
Yes.
Do you realize that my children are biracial? Do you realize that whatever it may be, it's a different dynamic. And so it's almost like the other.
Yeah.
And that part of it is a little interesting just because in this corridor, we are Asian Americans are the minority of minorities. If you're in LA or in Seattle, lots more Asians. You go to Hawaii, way more Asian.
You're the majority.
Yeah. You go to Asia, there's lots of Asians over in Asia.
Turns out.
According to research.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, we've talked about, where do we need to be as a family? And this is where we've made our home. I think if I were to go back and I were to be able to talk to younger Brian, that would have been 2000 when I moved to Tennessee. And, I've been grateful for the opportunities and stuff like that. And I have a lot of friends here that will be friends for my life. And I'm grateful for that. And I think especially as my children are older now, and as you said, some of your background, like even talking about fashion and things, like I think my children are good looking. I may be biased, but other people validate that. So
I'm an objective opinion, and I will say they're beautiful. They're gorgeous.
thank you for that.
Yeah.
Part of it, you had said like Nashville's not the market if they would like to pursue any kind of modeling. Now that I sit with that and I go, okay, so what does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean in order to give my children the opportunity to go pursue the things that they desire and love?
Yeah.
My son wants to do real estate. So like he's not terribly interested he wants to build a brand and do other things, but he's very entrepreneurial. Right now he hasn't indicated like he wants to move markets. And I'm 100% supportive of that. My daughter is less up on like wanting to have the change for the sake of change. My son's like, change it up, I'm good. I don't know what that means. She's finishing up her freshman year in high school, so there's still some time. But when we start to look at that, I start to go, where are the opportunities that are best going to give my children success? I think that parents are especially tuned to the fact that they want to provide opportunities for their children different than they had.
Of course.
To thrive and to flourish at an earlier age.
Yeah. I think your answer is you want them to know and be encouraged and affirmed of their identity of being half Korean, half white, but you don't want to overemphasize it. You were saying you don't want to just focus on a few things. You want to integrate it.
Yes.
And you also want to figure out how to give them the best opportunities possible.
And giving them tools to understand when life goes wrong or when people's own brokenness intersects theirs. Right?
Yeah.
This is why this person was mean to you. This is who you are. Right? This is how you can learn to adapt and navigate that. So there's going to be those situations where on the basis of appearance, because we look the way we look.
Yeah.
Right? Certain types of brokenness will come out because people are suspicious and judgmental by how you look.
Yeah.
Right? And that's important to acknowledge. Part of the issue for me growing up was that, no, it wasn't because of that. It's like, pretty sure it was. Like if you have experienced any type of racism, you can read that pretty clearly on somebody's face.
Yes, you can.
And so now I'm supposed to pretend that they're not? The only way that you can do that is you kind of self-gaslight. Well, no, they must not have meant that. But it's a lie. That's a shove.
Yes,
Shoving
it is.
down. It's like completely not the way it was. The problem, I think, for some of the wisdom in the United States at that time was colorblindness. Right? Let's just affirm the person. It's like, wait a minute. So affirm the person, but not that part of you. 'Cause that's not as important. No, don't worry about that. It's like, that is important. And what my goal with my children is to give it the proper importance. When I talk about stuff now, why is Korea and Korea things on my lips a lot?
Yeah.
It's because it sounds funny. Like some people are more understanding if you talk about your new pet or you just had a baby and you're talking about the baby all the time. Well, of course you are.
Yeah.
Right? I think sometimes, especially when you start talking about that stuff, people all of a sudden now want to put you in some type of political camp or ideological camp just because all of a sudden this is a new discovery and you're talking about things about race. It's like, pretty sure didn't say any of those things, political, religious, whatever. I'm just talking about it, but now you kind of want to say, oh, because you're talking about blah, you may fall here, here, and here.
Yeah.
And I think in the Southeast especially, there are obviously wonderful, caring, careful listeners. And I think what you run into also, because there's a lot of cultural things down here in terms of how church and things get mixed, culturally speaking.
It's embedded.
It's embedded.
Yes.
But that means that there's a mode of operation where it's like, well, that means you are, and there's these foregone conclusions that they make in their mind that has no bearing on who you are, or what you believe, or whatever. So that's been a very interesting place to kind of sit with, especially living in this corridor of the world.
I really like what you said about how, as Asians in Tennessee, we don't really fall in the white category or the black category, obviously. Yep. So it's this sort of other, which I haven't really felt and sensed prior to living here. And really, I think that it might be my own projection, but also people around me not quite knowing where to put me and where I fit, and putting me into this other category.
Yep.
is sort of something that I've felt and sensed. But as a Korean adoptee, it's a unique place in that, like, you're more white than me because you grew up in a white family,
Yeah.
but you're not white.
Right.
You're Korean
Yep.
by ethnic background, but you don't quite feel Korean. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but because you didn't grow up in a Korean family, you were adopted.
Yep.
So it's like, I'm just thinking about how I have always felt like I'm neither nor. I don't believe in one or the other because I'm Korean American. I was born in America, but I speak Korean fluently. I'm Korean culturally. That's how I was raised. But for you, there's this added category of birth parents. And so really not, again, I want you to share how you feel, but it's just sort of this added layer and complexity of identity that I feel like you have to process and deal with.
I wrote an essay called Harmony of Identity, which I shared last time. And I need to share actually the written copy for people as well. It's interesting that my part of my given name was Harmony.
Yes.
And it's like, did the woman know something about, just have a sense about where I'd end up? Because she knew that I was going to end up somewhere, probably in the United States, if you just played it by statistics. So what did that mean? That meant that it wasn't one line, like musical line. It was many things. I think the question for me is, what does that look like for me? And becoming comfortable with the process of becoming that. Like, I could, if I moved to Seoul tomorrow, and I figured out how to, like, over the course of a few years, get fluent on things, right? Like, I still wouldn't be Korean.
Right.
I would still feel like a foreigner.
Yeah.
But I can disappear in a crowd a lot better. You know what I'm saying? I think the thing that happens, especially from my experience, is that you just have to, you can explore it, you can let it be. And you have to kind of hold it where you are not any of these one things, but you are the multiplicity of these things. And I think that sometimes when life brings the discomfort for the multiplicity, right? Because it's a little bit more to hold. If you say, I grew up here, I grew up in the small town, I never left the small town, this is what I know, and I go. That's a lot of people's experience. I think especially in the United States, there's more movement of people just because really from all over the world, we have people in the United States. So there's more blending of things, and that's why there's like an American culture now, for better or worse. But I think with having adoption as the story, there's like added layers of things that you can't remove them. And in fact, you can't restore them. It becomes something different. And I say that just like if there's a piece of wood, my adopted mom loves working with wood because my grandpa was a master carpenter.
Wow.
She was handier than my dad.
Wow.
She says a piece of glued wood is stronger than a natural piece of wood because like now there's something binding the things together.
I love that.
And I think about that. It's like I'm really more like a multi-layered piece that has been glued together.
Yeah.
Which means that it's required some glue, but it means that it's stronger. And so I take that as kind of the position. Like, I cannot be maybe this one natural piece of wood, but I am many layers of wood, right, of different species glued together, and I'm stronger because of it.
You have more to hold, more to work with almost. I think that's how you're choosing to see it.
Yeah.
Instead of, gosh, I have so much more that I have to deal with, I have more to hold. That's how you're choosing to see it. I love that. You're really good with metaphors and analogies, by the way. Glue that holds wood together. It's like the art of, I think I'm pronouncing this correctly, kintsugi?
Oh, yeah, where the Japanese,
Kintsugi. I think it's kintsugi. Kintsugi.
you bet the pot that you glue back together and you put the gold in it and stuff.
Right. Yeah. It's the art of repairing that which is broken with gold, which you then see the fractures. Yep. But that piece becomes more beautiful and more valuable because it has the cracks, because it has the repair with gold.
Yeah. The repair was costly.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why it was required to have gold in it was to hey, well, this is going to make sure that you put the value back into it and stuff like that. And it was repaired and it worked.
Plus more.
Plus more.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you talked a little bit about a counselor. Of course, Sabrina, who are you processing this with is what I want to ask.
Yeah, besides myself, and where Sabrina is good to play that role.
Yeah.
You have a counselor, and the counseling started for different reasons. Probably a few years ago, like off and on. I think our generation is more comfortable talking about going to a counselor.
Yeah, like who doesn't go see a therapist, right?
Well, I mean, like our parents.
Right. Well, yeah.
And then go to see a counselor.
But like our generation and and younger, right?
I think it's good to have somebody that you can have an objective conversation with, because they bring a different perspective into the frame. And what that means is that then you're able to, how do you put it? There's relational equity between the two of you as a counselor and a patient, but it's not the same. It doesn't buzz at the same frequency.
Oh, I love that.
So it's like, oh, okay. So
I love
let me come down here. It's like, okay, that makes sense. Now let me bring it back online, put the car back in gear and go.
Because with a spouse, it can buzz at the same frequency.
Yeah. Or,
right?
Yeah.
Or a family member or friend. I just have to reiterate that. Yeah. That's a great, sorry, I interrupted you. That's such a great way you put it. Okay. Yeah. Keep going.
No, that's it. For counselors like that, sometimes like they'll play a spot for a time in your life. Some people have long-time counselors, and that's good too. I think that, again, like holding all those pieces together, it's like, how are you assembling that? I've loved Legos all my life. And I was actually ashamed of loving Legos until later into my adult life. Like, adults still play with Legos. It was like, oh, it was awesome. And Legos are wonderful because it's a system to build something. And there's not a wrong way to do it. There's just like maybe a better way, or maybe there's a more creative way or something, but you can build it. And one of my favorite things to do as a child was not putting together the finished piece. It was a month later, I'm like, what else can I build? And then I'd rip it apart and then build something else. And that was kind of like the pattern. Like, here's what I've built. This is what they say it should be. What else could it be? And that's where I really loved that system. And the system is fun because you can't screw it up. It's like, it's a brick that goes on another brick. I mean, that's about as straightforward as you get. But there's so much complexity that goes along with that. In saying that, like, what pieces is the counselor or your spouse or your friend or your confidant, how are they helping you place those pieces? Or here's this random pink piece. What the heck is this doing in the middle of all these green pieces? It's like, oh, that's what that's for. It's a different exercise,
And have you done processing with your fellow Korean adoptees that you're connected with?
Just honestly through a lot of the conversations. Just as you hear things and like you talk to somebody, you kind of pick up things. Like, oh, I'll remember that. Sometimes life comes to you and like there is like the light has shone down from the heavens, and you hear the angelic choir or Monty Python God going, hey, over here, whatever the revelation may be. Sometimes it's that, or sometimes it's the bush burning out in the desert. But oftentimes it's you catch it. You caught 2 seconds of a conversation. The whole thing was good, but that particular thing just tuned the engine a little bit different, and again and again. And that's what I found, honestly, with on the Korean trip that I went on, and then also just by talking to other adoptees and folks, or like talking to your parents, talking to you. Like, there's just little pieces that you kind of you can rebuild that identity. You can process those things, and the person will never even know necessarily that they did that. I said, what, when? And they're being honest about it. They're not being like ugly. It's like, yeah, there's this time that you said this to me. That changed my life, man. I've had people come up to me and say this, like, you said this one time to me, and it really changed my life. I'm like, it did? What did I say? And I don't mean it like you're not important. I just mean like, I don't remember what I said. But that had an impact. And I know like I've had those voices that are big in my ears, or those moments that are salient where I'm like, that totally helps me. And so I think if you're looking to be healthy and you're committed to the work in all senses of the word, then you can start to grab those pieces, because now you're not afraid to lose yourself by holding on to the unhealth. And I'll be honest, I think there was parts of me that felt like some of the sadness, I would lose part of myself, because that core burned so hot and so hard for so long. I'm like, yeah, but what happens when I rip this out?
If it's no longer a part of your identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, where it's like, but now it's like, oh, here's like the pine cone that got burnt and whatever, but only in heat does the pine cone open up and release the seeds. So like when you see these like devastating forest fires, and then you see like a year later, here's like the buds that are shooting back up. I think what happened is like the core of all that compressed yuck for years, now it's allowing things to bloom. It doesn't mean it's a mature tree. It just means that I see signs of life.
How are we doing on time? Are we
Let's take a
going to
look here. We
ask
are-
people for
We're at 2 o'clock. We've been here
questions?
for about an hour. We can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the last thing I want to ask
Yep.
is has to do with our names.
Yes.
So we're going to do a thing. Let's do an intro as an outro before we ask for questions.
Yep.
Give us a new introduction of who you are. Not my name is Brian Shun. I'm this many years old. I'll go first.
Okay.
So I said my name is Esther Shin McIntosh. 저는 신은영입니다. 82년생. 아버님은 신영수, 어머님은 이청미, 그리고 저 딸은 어저께 3살 됐어요. 주은이라고 해요. 주은이는 주님의 은혜. 아버님이 이름을 지으셨어요. 그리고 저는 은영, 하나님의 은혜, 영원한 은혜. So what I said was, I'm 신은영, that's my Korean name, born in 82. In Korean culture, it is common, it is normal, it is almost proper to introduce yourself by establishing the year you were born. By stating it aloud to establish authority. Who was born before whom? Who is older? So you know how to speak to the person you're talking to. Should I use honorific Korean or not? My mother is Lee Chung-mi. My father is Shin Young-soo. My daughter, her name is Pearl, but her Korean name, which is what I call her, my family calls her Chun, which my father named her. It means 주님의 은혜, the Lord's grace. So, can you give an intro?
That's a hard act to follow.
This is not a competition.
All right. Well, you say that. You know my name. Born in 1980. I'm going to try to not be wordy on this. So suffer a moment of silence here, folks. I know the pieces of who I am better than ever now. Korean by birth, American by growth, me by all stretches of everything. I'm learning how to take the components that are with me to cook a beautiful meal. There's nothing scientific about cooking. It just has to taste right. And in this phase of my life, who I am is not letting anything tap down part of who I am and not trying to overemphasize, but I want to be curious about all of it for the purposes of integration.
Beautiful. Wow.
Now, if I can say that in Korean, that's the next part 2, folks. Part 205.
That's what you can work on.
I'll work on that. You gotta help me. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Should we hang on and wait
Let's hang on. Yep.
a moment?
We'll have some comments. So last time, folks, I didn't realize there was about a 10-second lag or so from our streaming software to Facebook Live. So we're going to wait a little bit. We may hear some chatter here. We're going to let some questions come in. I do see one from Tiffany. And she said, when you say your parents had a loveless marriage, was that as an affection toward each other, or did they show affection, but you could feel the energy of a relationship being loveless? That's a great question. What I mean is that they never really loved each other in a way where you'd say, like, this is a warm, loving relationship, right? So that meant that they loved me well. They provided well for me. It was safe, but there wasn't like a lot of, open doorways to be emotionally open, right? If you learn, like, as you get older, you learn like what your parents carry into a situation, right? My dad, who passed away in 2008 from Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. If you understand where he grew up, he grew up in a home where his parents they did not love each other. They actually actively hated one another. He had an alcoholic grandma that lived upstairs. And so he learned to be emotionally neutral, right? That's how he learned how to survive. And even though he was a deep, caring, warm man, because I could definitely feel that toward me, right? Like, he didn't know how to deal with that, right? It was better for it to just be here than have the up and down. Some of it was because he was laid back, but some of it was because that's how he learned to just move on.
Yeah.
Right? He was very uncomfortable with that emotional dynamic. So part of me knew that, like, there wasn't that path. Could I be honest with them? Of course. Could I be emotionally honest with both of them? I could. What I didn't see was what a thriving, healthy marriage looked like in context, right? I don't mean disrespect to my mom or my dad in that regard, but if you grew up in a household where, like, mom and dad love each other a lot, and this is how they express their love and stuff like that, it's a different thing. For that particular dynamic, it was like, so the best way I can do this is I either have to be overly emotional to get a point across, or I'm nothing, right? So the energy of that was, there was never like a normal calibration point. I had to find that later, right? To say, okay, here's where, like, normal emotion kind of has range, right? And rather, it was more treated like, here's the ceiling, and I have to manage underneath the ceiling, versus thinking about it like it goes up and down, and there's natural variability, and that's healthy.
Yeah.
So, Tiffany, I hope that helps answer your question with that. I did feel that dynamic. I wouldn't have known how to put it into words. Talking with some of my good friends from the years past where they grew up with me, they said, yeah, it always felt a little bit weird in your home. I'm like, what do you mean by weird? They go, it just was like, all of a sudden, like, it kind of came to life when we walked in the door. And when I really think about that, I was like, well, yeah, I guess it was a little bit more placid. And I think sometimes what I had to disambiguate in my life was peace does not equal placidness. And that was really difficult, especially for a guy who's not afraid of conflict. I'm like, if it was peaceful, it meant that it was dead and not growing. And I've had to really learn to walk that back.
You mind if I respond here a little bit, Brian, about loveless marriage? And that makes me think of something in Korean culture where I think what you're talking about is a generational thing, the time of our parents. But my parents being Korean and knowing a lot of Korean parents of my parents' generation, you didn't marry for love necessarily. In fact, it was and still is common to be arranged in marriages in Korean culture. In fact, my parents tried to arrange me in marriage many a times. And I indulged them and actually showed up to some meeting places where I knew that was the intention. I'm like sizing this person up to think, could I be married to this guy? And it's common for people who don't even know you to try to arrange you in a marriage, because your parents will go, hey, could you do me a favor? Can you do me a solid? My daughter is single. She needs to be married off. She's in her 30s. This is already much too late. So I need her married off. Could you try to look for someone for us? It's very common. My parents actually were not in an arranged marriage. They actually met and married for love. But during the time of their generation, that was not common. And even now, you can be in an arranged marriage. But I think that the view of love in marriage, I don't want to generalize this, but it's actually different in Korean culture, the way we see love and marriage and relationship. It's more about duty. It's kind of like Christian culture in that there's a duty, there's a purpose. You're to rear children. So it's an interesting question. I guess I wanted to kind of like talk about Korean culture and how that's seen, and to show affection, to show signs of affection and love in relationship. Even if you're married to someone, it's looked down upon. Like you do not show PDA in public in Korean culture, because that is rude and inappropriate.
Really?
Yes.
All right. I'm trying to think about now on the trip if I saw anybody kiss or hug. I don't know if I did. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Let's reframe a little bit like the love and marriage thing,
Yeah.
right? Because definitely, if you look at statistically, like you can have as much or more divorce in a marriage for love as in like arranged marriage at the inception of a marriage, right?
Absolutely.
And I think the thing that people can grow into regardless, and either way you come into the frame, is learning how to care for the other person.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's been people who, like, hey, this was arranged and it's a loving, caring relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think with people who don't become emotionally connected, it's like you never are curious about the person because it can represent, I don't know how this is going to go. It could go good, it could go bad. You know, I think sometimes you're used to things going bad. It's like, it requires a little bit more inertia to get it going and stuff. I think in my parents' case, like I said, my dad learned to be Switzerland. So did I ever see him actively romance my mom? No. You know, started to near the end of his life before, you know, some other things set in with there's dementia and the ALS stuff. But that kind of turned it back around where there was some progress. Like he made a reservation for my mom on Valentine's Day. Like, you know, you might as well have told me that
Jesus came back.
something like that. At Star Wars, right? It was Ewan McGregor. He would walk through it. That was it. But yeah, it was. It was just interesting. So like he never learned to do that. But if you looked at where his parents were, light years difference.
Yeah.
You know, so we all carry like it's a different level of brokenness on that stuff. Yeah.
Any other questions that are coming through?
Tom, thanks for engaging. Thanks for the comment here. Muriel, thank you as well. I've really enjoyed this. I hope we can do another one. Take 3.
Yeah.
Everybody's healthy and doing all the things.
Yeah.
We'll leave it for a little bit more. Just
Yeah,
for
let's
some
do it.
comments, stuff like that. This is good. Thank you all for tuning in today as well. This is a great way to keep a conversation going and for all of us to learn and grow and get better together. And you know, if these conversations like this can help, you know, just put it out there. I'm glad to do it.
Yeah. I mean, we covered so much in an hour. I mean, we can go in a million different directions, right? For you, Korean adoption is top of mind. What it means to be Korean American, what it means to be Asian American, what it means to feel like the other, what it means to be a racial minority, what it means to be a model minority, what it means to be in marriage as you're processing these things. I mean, there are a myriad of topics we could cover.
So I think what we can do as part of our homework is maybe list some of those things out, but then for any of the viewers, if you're interested in hearing more specifically on a topic, we'd love to hear from you. Like share your thoughts on that because I'm happy to we're happy to kind of continue the conversation here. And obviously, if there's I would love to hear you talk about this. And I think obviously there's going to be a value for not just one person or many people. I think it'd just be generally very good.
Yeah, yeah.
So, Julia, thank you for tuning in. I see your comment. Appreciate you. We'll wait just a couple more moments here. I realize it's about a cup of tea's worth of conversation here that we've had.
Oh.
So
That would be a good name for a podcast, A Cup of Tea.
we're copyrighted. It don't take it. We already are. It's already copyrighted. All right, folks. Thank you for joining us. We'll hope to see you again sometime soon. Until then, have a great weekend. Hope you have a wonderful, safe, healthy week up ahead. Cheers, folks.
Yay!